Señores claustrales, sentaos y descubríos. Se declara abierta la sesión. La señora secretaria general leerá el acuerdo del claustro de la Universidad de Jaén por el que se aprueba la concesión del doctorado honoris causa por esta universidad al excelentísimo señor don Tomás Südhof.
María José Carazo Liébana, secretaria general de la Universidad de Jaén, según lo establecido en el artículo 155 de los Estatutos de la Universidad, certifico que el claustro universitario, en su sesión número 10 de 16 de julio del 2025, previa legal convocatoria y reunido reglamentariamente, adoptó, entre otros, el siguiente acuerdo: aprobar la propuesta de concesión del doctorado honoris causa por la Universidad de Jaén al excelentísimo señor don Tomás Südhof. Y para que así conste y surta efectos, expido la presente en Jaén a 27 de noviembre del 2025.
Ruego a la señora secretaria general que, acompañada por el director del Departamento de Biología Experimental, se digne conducir a este claustro al candidato al grado de doctor honoris causa, don Tomás Südhof. Doctores, levantaos y cubríos. Doctores, sentaos y descubríos. Se concede la palabra al profesor doctor don Diego Franco Jaime, catedrático de Universidad del Área de Biología Celular de la Universidad de Jaén, para que exponga los méritos del doctorando don Tomás Südhof y solicite la venia del claustro para que se le conceda la investidura como doctor honoris causa.
dear Rector Magnificus of the University of Jaén, dear Professor Thomas Südhof, dear members of the University of Jaén Governing Council, deans and directors, dear authorities, dear professors and students of the University of Jaén, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor and pleasure for me to be here today, presenting Professor Thomas Südhof to this Faculty of Doctors as a doctoral Honoris Causa candidate by the University of Jaén. I'm sure this honor is also shared by all the members of our university. I will now briefly outline the academic, research, and professional career of Thomas Südhof, one of the most influential and respected scientists in the field of neuroscience today. Thomas Südhof was born in Göttingen, Germany, in December 1955. He studied medicine at the University of Göttingen, graduated in 1982. He subsequently completed his doctoral thesis at the Max Planck Institute for Biophysical Chemistry in Göttingen under the supervision of Dr. Victor Whitaker. His work focusing on elucidating the structure and the secretory granules of the chromaffin cells that release adrenaline. After obtaining his doctorate, Dr. Thomas Südhof moved to the United States in 1983 to continue his postdoctoral training at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, specifically at the Department of Molecular Genetics, where he worked with Dr. Michael Brown and Dr. Joseph Goldstein. During that time, he contributed to characterizing the regulation of the LDL receptor, that is to say, the low-density lipoprotein receptor, as well as to serve to other regulatory elements of the steroid metabolism. It is important to highlight that Professor Südhof had only been 2 years within the laboratory when his supervisors, Dr. Michael Brown and Joseph Goldstein, received the Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology for the pioneer work on the understanding of the cholesterol metabolism in 1985. 1 year later, in 1986, Thomas Südhof began his independent career at the UT Southwestern. At the time, he oriented his research, moving from lipid metabolism to molecular neuroscience, focusing his attention on nerve terminals. These terminals release the chemicals called neurotransmitters, which act as highly specialized points of communication between neurons, the synapses. Proper brain function depends on the precision of this synaptic communication, a failure of which can lead to psychiatric disorders or neurodegenerative disease. During this period, he identified the function of key proteins such as synaptotacmin, a protein that is essential calcium sensor for the rapid release of neurotransmitters, and discovered multiple components and regulators of the vesicular fusion machinery, such as different proteins of the Munc and the ring families, respectively, which act as scaffold proteins in the presynaptic active zone, thus helping the neurotransmitter release. He also established the functional relationship with the SNARE complex. Almost 3 decades ago, his laboratory discovered neuroleptins and neuroligands, proteins that will be later revealed to be altered synaptic adhesion molecules in autism patients. Since then, Thomas Südhof has been investigating how synapses form, enabling establishment of specific connections that build the neural circuitries. In 1989, after a period of combining various positions, he accepted the position as the director of the Center for Basic Neuroscience at UT Southwestern in Dallas, which later became the Department of Neuroscience a few years later. Professor Südhof was in practice the founder and the driving force behind the department and held various academic and management responsibilities until his departure to Stanford. His time in Dallas can be defined as decisive both for the molecular discoveries and for the organizational leadership. It's worth noting that in 1968, Thomas Südhof has been investigator at the prestigious Howard Hughes Medical Institute, a position that since the beginning of his independent career has provided him with the stability and intellectual freedom required to developing far-reaching research programs. Thanks to these, he has trained numerous students and postdoctoral scientists, consolidating a true scientific school of researchers who integrate molecular genetics, biochemistry, and neurophysiology, and who now direct scientific laboratories and institutions in the United States, Europe, and Asia. Furthermore, during time at the University of Southwestern, he accumulated important awards and recognitions. In 2008, Professor Thomas Südhof moved his laboratory to Stanford University in California, where it remains today. At Stanford, Thomas Südhof holds the Abraham Goldstein Professorship at the Stanford University School of Medicine and serves as a professor in the Department of Molecular and Cellular Physiology, with appointments in the departments of Neurology, Psychiatry, and Behavioral Sciences. During his nearly 20 years at Stanford, Professor Südhof has focused his research on understanding and unraveling the mechanisms of synaptic transmission, synapses specification, and the link between synaptic genes and neuropsychiatric disease. In 2013, Thomas Südhof received the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine for his work on the machinery that regulates vesicular trafficking, contributions that include elucidating how secretory vesicles dock, recognize calcium, and fuse. This award was shared with Randy Sherman and James Rodman. The jury recognized his Nobel Prize crystallized decades of presynaptic discoveries that today form the molecular basis of neuronal exocytosis. One of the most significant anecdotes linked to the awarding of the Nobel Prize to Thomas Südhof in 2013, and which connects him in a very special way to Olan, occurred precisely when he was driving to Baeza to participate in one of the scientific workshops organized by the International University of Andalusia, where he has participated in numerous occasions and as an organizer and speaker. Recognized by the Baeza City Council in 2017, his relations with the Spanish science dates back from the late 90s, when he began a fruitful collaboration with the Department of Medical Physiology and Biophysics of the Faculty of Medicine of Seville. This relationship later expanded with the Institute of Biomedicine in Seville, where he was honored in 2015 as an IBIS Distinguished Investigator. He has also served on the Scientific Advisory Board of the Cajal International Neuroscience Center in Madrid, contributing to the development of neuroscientist research in Spain. A profound admirer of the art and history of Andalusia and Spain, Thomas Südhof has taken advantage of each visit to discover and enjoy our heritage, stopping, among other places, at the Jaén Cathedral, where he was impressed by the architecture of Andrés de Valdivia. Since winning the Nobel Prize, Südhof has maintained intense scientific activities at Stanford University, collaborating in consortia for modeling neurodegenerative disease, such as projects related to Alzheimer's disease, and participated in advisory committees and biotechnology startups. In 2023, he was appointed to the Scientific Advisory Board of the Secretary General of the United Nations, reflecting his involvement in scientific advisory services at the highest level. He also remains associated with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and various international scientific academies. Throughout his academic and professional journey, Thomas Südhof has embraced a famous phrase of Claude Bernard, considered the founder of experimental physiology. The art of making discoveries consists on seeing what everyone sees and thinking what no one is thought. As it can be seen in the intensive and brilliant academic and research career of Professor Thomas Südhof, his constant pursuit of scientific excellence always stands out. From the very beginning, he joined the laboratory of an excellent biochemist of the time, Professor Victor Whitaker, and later trained researchers of the statue of Professor Michael Brown and Joseph Goldstein, who preceded him in winning the Nobel Prize and undoubtedly guide him in his pursuit and achievement of scientific excellence. It is also important to highlight his commitment to multidisciplinarity, incorporating other fields such as biochemistry, physiology, molecular genetics, and structural biology, to name some of them, into the cellular molecular foundations of neuronal synapses. Furthermore, throughout his career, he has broadened his interest in science, beginning with chromaffin cells of the adrenal glands and later moving into the neuronal synapses, taking the basic mechanisms of their functioning as a reference in both cases. Once these essential pilots were being unraveled, he has gradually begun to seek their application both for the understanding of the pathological processes and from there, from the search of new therapeutics designs and targets. His academic career is also an example of commitment to science and scientific advancement, leading each of his training stages with a commitment to manage an institutional work to consistently develop world-class academic units. Perhaps the awarding of the Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology is one of the most striking awards and distinction at social level and with a global worldwide impact. However, it is important to highlight that Professor Thomas Südhof's list of achievement has been and will surely continue to be in the future, filled with many other awards and distinctions. For example, in 1997, he received the United States National Academy of Science Prize in Molecular Biology. In 2004, the MedLife Prize for Alzheimer's disease research, and also in 2004, the Bristol-Myers Squibb Prize in Neuroscience Research. In 2010, he received the Clavi Prize in Neuroscience, jointly with James Rodman and Richard Scheller, and in 2013, the Lasker-de-Bacary Prize in Basic Medicine, jointly with Richard Scheller, among many other prizes. Among his distinctions, it's worth highlighting the Grand Médaille de la Ville de Paris, together with James Rodman and Randy Schekman in 2014, and the Große Bundesverdienstkreuz mit Stern, that's to say, the Grand Cross of Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany with stars. He's also elected member of prestigious societies, including the National Academies of Science, Medicine, Arts and Science of the United States of America, the Norwegian Academy of Science, the German Academy Leopoldina, and the Royal Society of London, among others. Thomas Südhof has given countless invited lectures at the world's most prestigious scientific meetings, such as Keystone and Gordon conferences, to name a few of them, throughout his research career. Some years, his lectures were so numerous that he would barely have time to travel around the world to continue sharing his scientific findings. He has served on the editorial boards of numerous scientific journals, including Neuron, the Journal of Biological Chemistry, Neuroscience, and the Journal of Neuroscience, as well as the Proceeding of the National Academy of Science, USA, among others. He has also co-founded several startups and served on the scientific advisory boards of more than 15 research centers and biotechnology and biomedical companies. Finally, to give a comprehensive overview of Professor Thomas Südhof's excellence, a quick overview of his scientific output is reflected by his more than 700 published papers, many of which have been published in the world's leading scientific journals, such as Cell, Nature, and Science. As it can be seen on this brief summary of Thomas Südhof's academic, scientific, and professional career, his perseverance on the pursuit of scientific excellence has been one of the greatest achievements. I believe that having Thomas Südhof at the University of Jaén today is a privilege of which the entire university community should be proud of. I'm also certain that the incorporation into the university faculty will be a sort of pride and inspiration for all the researchers who are joining us today in the room. Therefore, we must focus on the trajectory and follow the wise advice of Marie Curie, the first researcher to receive 2 Nobel Prizes, first in physics in 1903, and later in chemistry in 1911, who stated, "We should never stop until we have reached the highest point we can achieve." Based on all the above, it is therefore unavoidable that Professor Thomas Südhof is nominated as a Doctor Honoris Causa by the University of Jaén at the Solemne Academy ceremony. Así pues, considerados y expuestos los hechos, dignísimas autoridades y claustrales, solicito con toda la consideración y encarecidamente ruego que se otorgue y confiera al excelentísimo señor Dr. Thomas Südhof el supremo grado de Doctor Honoris Causa por la Universidad de Jaén.
Se va a proceder a la solemne investidura como doctor honoris causa por la Universidad de Jaén al excelentísimo señor don Tomás Südhof. Doctores, levantaos y cubríos. Concedemos al excelentísimo señor don Tomás Südhof el supremo grado de doctor honoris causa por la Universidad de Jaén. Sí, concedemos. Habéis sido nombrado y designado doctor honoris causa por el claustro de la Universidad de Jaén en testimonio de vuestros relevantes méritos. Por ello, y en virtud de la autoridad que me está concedida, os entrego y confiero el título que atestigüe en todas partes y para siempre el grado de esa dignidad doctoral. Recibe también la medalla doctoral de vuestro cargo, de vuestro grado, símbolo del corazón que se ennoblece con el magisterio que en este momento se os confiere. Y como símbolo de tan alto honor, os impongo sobre vuestra cabeza este birrete, tantas veces laureado, honrado sin cesar por tan grandes, tan ilustres y tan excelsos maestros en los reinos de España, portadlo siempre y llevadlo a todas partes, cuan corona de vuestros estudios y méritos. Os entrego ahora los atributos de este nombramiento y distinción, saber, el libro de la ciencia y la sabiduría, que es preciso que cultivéis y difundáis sin descanso, para que tengáis presente que por grandes que sean vuestros talentos, siempre deberéis manifestar reverencia, respeto y consideración a vuestros maestros y predecesores. Recibid también el anillo que en los pasados tiempos, en estas venerables y solemnes ceremonias, cual símbolo de los privilegios de firmar y sellar todos los dictámenes, arbitrajes y consultas de vuestra ciencia y profesión, se entregaba y por conferido se tenía. No sé si... I don't know. Recibid, por último, los guantes blancos, como símbolo de la pureza y fortaleza que vuestras manos han de conservar y también como símbolo de vuestra dignidad. Invito al nuevo doctor honoris causa a prestar juramento o promesa.
I solemnly promise upon my conscience and honor to defend and respect all the rights, privileges, and honors of this University of Jaén, wherever in the world I may be, as well as to support and aid it whenever I'm called upon to do so.
Si así lo hiciereis, que la memoria de todos los claustrales os lo pague, y si no, que os lo demande. ¿Cómo lo tiene? Doctores, sentaos y descubríos. Tiene la palabra el doctor Honoris Causa, excelentísimo señor don Thomas Südhof, para que pronuncie su discurso de ingreso en este claustro.
Dear Rector Magnificus of the University of Jaén, dear President of the Social Council, dear professors, Juan Alberto Marchal and Diego Franco Jaime, dear authorities, academics, and members of this university, dear friends, students, and colleagues, at the proposal of the Department of Experimental Biology, the University of Jaén welcomes me today into this community as Dr. Honoris Causa. Let me thank you all for bestowing on me this honor that will have a unique place in my heart. I'm not just pleased and flattered. I'm truly touched by the occasion. Thank you again and again. This is a really beautiful ceremony. I extend my sincere gratitude to Professor Diego Franco Jaime for his generous commitment in guiding and advocating my candidacy, and for his warm words of welcome. And to Professors Maria Angeles Peinado Herreros and José López Barneo, among other colleagues, for their support. Andalusia has always been very special for me professionally and personally. My first contact with Andalusia was when Rafa Fernandez Chacon, today professor and director of the Institute of Biomedicine of Seville, was a postdoc in my lab. During that time, I visited Seville. I visited the Department of Medical Physiology and Biophysics at the university there, where I met Pepe López Barneo, the first native of Jaén I had the pleasure of meeting, as well as Guillermo Alvarez de Toledo and Lucia Tavares, with whom I later had the opportunity to collaborate productively. But I really learned to appreciate Andalusia when I was co-organizing with Rafa and Arthur Conrad a scientific workshop at the International University of Andalusia, UNIA, in Baeza in 2004. The meeting was scientifically productive and culturally rewarding, from seeing Baeza's incredible Renaissance architecture to visiting Antonio Machado's classroom. A wonderful experience. The workshop was such a great success that a similar UNIA workshop was organized again in 2013 by Juan Lerma, Tom Schwartz, and Jose Esteban. It was during my trip to this second workshop, when I was driving from Madrid in a grumpy mood, to be honest, after a sleepless and overnight flight, that I received the telephone call informing me of the Nobel Prize. A miracle. I initially thought it was a joke, and it took me a while to accept that it was true. I am happy to credit Andalusia and Jaén for making this happen. After arriving in Baeza in 2013 and learning about my Nobel Prize, I had 2 wonderful days of science and celebrations. In 2017, I was extremely pleased to be invited again to organize another UNIA workshop in Baeza. I believe the 2017 workshop was also a success, and that all of us benefited from it scientifically. Moreover, for me personally, more rewarding than the science was the wonderful recognition given to me at that time by the city of Baeza. I was asked to sign the city's Golden Book and received a statuette showing the city's most iconic symbols, which is truly beautiful, a special occasion that I have treasured. Also in 2017, I visited the city of Jaén for the first time and had the opportunity to admire, at least from the outside, the masterpiece of Andrés de Valdivia, the Cathedral of the Assumption at Jaén. Scientific research in Southern Europe has achieved impressive levels of excellence, often under conditions of limited institutional and financial support. Although I have not yet had the opportunity to visit the Department of Experimental Medicine at the University of Jaén, I appreciate that it demonstrates a remarkable breadth of scientific activity across the molecular, cellular, and organismal levels, an achievement that would not be possible without the excellence of its researchers, students, and faculty. Thus, you will understand that Andalusia in general and Jaén in particular is very special to me personally, as they represent both science and culture, both serious work and exuberant celebration. This makes the present occasion even more meaningful for me. I'm truly grateful for being admitted into your academic community in this spectacular manner. I now want to talk briefly about my path to the Nobel Prize. My trajectory in science was a bit unusual in that I didn't set out to be a scientist. As a teenager, I rebelled against everything motivating me to grow the long hair that I now very much miss. I don't know where it went. My primary interests were philosophy and classical music. After graduating from high school in 1975, I decided to study medicine because I felt that philosophy was empty talk. Classical music required more talent than I had. I actually had none. And business and law were too transactional as careers for me personally to be of interest. I never thought making money was that attractive. I did not have any inkling yet of science at this time. In fact, I thought that science was an esoteric waste of time, and I was more interested in actually doing something useful. All of this changed during my first years in medical school. I studied initially in Aachen and then in Göttingen, where I was born. But critical for my thinking was a semester that I spent as a visiting student at Harvard Medical University in the fall of 1978. My stay at Harvard was eye-opening. Although I was treated with kind condescension, sometimes not that kind, coming from an unknown German medical school, I was taught the most important lesson of my medical education. The fact that we as medical professionals, as doctors, whose mission is to help patients, are often at a loss to explain or treat their diseases. In my experience, doctors in Germany and the United States were genuinely trying to do the best for their patients, were truly devoted to patient care, but at the same time were mostly helpless and clueless, pretending they knew something that they didn't actually know and that they knew they didn't know. For the majority of diseases, there were no real treatments because medicine as a science did not understand these diseases, something that is true even today after decades of additional research. This realization got me interested in science, the realization that we needed a better understanding of diseases as such in order to help patients. After returning from my visiting studentship at Harvard Medical School, I decided to explore science and became an assistant scientist, a really strange title if you think about it, at the Max Planck Institute for Biophysical Chemistry in Germany, Göttingen, while I also continued my medical education at the University of Göttingen. I became a member of the Department of Neurochemistry, led by the late Professor Victor P. Whitaker, ostensibly to work with a senior member of the department, Dr. Stephen Morris. However, Dr. Morris left shortly after I started. As a result, I was an assistant scientist with an office bigger than the one I have now at Stanford, an empty lab that could have accommodated 10 people, and no guidance whatsoever since Professor Whitaker had other things to do. Those were glorious days. I could do whatever I wanted. I happily wasted in exploring meaningless questions endless time, putzing around in the laboratory since my medical school classes didn't require my attendance. I tried lots of experiments and published my first paper as a single author in 1982 because there was nobody else there. I published multiple additional papers as a student, including papers describing the discovery of annexons, which returned Cal electrons, talked to innumerable people about their experiments, and produced all kinds of data. Nothing I did then was particularly useful or especially meaningful, but the independence I was given educated me and prepared me for my subsequent career. After graduating from medical school with an MD and receiving a doctoral degree in 1982, I decided on a career as a clinical scientist, planning to become an internist, to become essentially a clinician who does research. I was not yet committed to becoming a real scientist. I still wanted to be primarily a doctor. I was advised that I should do a postdoctoral fellowship in the United States after my clinical internship before starting the major part of my residency at a university hospital in Germany. After considering several laboratories, I decided to join the laboratory of Drs. Brown and Goldstein in Dallas, Texas in 1983, a choice that astounded many of my friends and colleagues in Germany given the unattractiveness of Dallas, both as a place to live and as a place to work. However, in hindsight, this was probably the best decision I could have made. Drs. Brown and Goldstein were brilliant scientists who made seminal contributions to cell biology and cholesterol metabolism. In their laboratory, their example taught me much of what I later practiced as a scientist in my own lab. Moreover, they introduced me to new ways of thinking and new experimental approaches. While in their laboratory, I cloned the LDL receptor gene and elucidated the main structure of the receptor, work that arguably contributed significantly to the Nobel Prize that was awarded to Drs. Brown and Goldstein in 1985. Moreover, I discovered the sequences that mediate the cholesterol-dependent regulation of the LDL receptor gene, which later led to the identification of SREBP, a milestone in metabolism research. I graduated from the Goldstein and Brown laboratory in 1986 and started my own laboratory in Dallas as an assistant professor. At this point, I made the third fateful decision in my career. After becoming an assistant scientist at the Max Planck Institute in Göttingen in 1979, and after deciding to join the Brown and Goldstein laboratory in 1983. In 1986, I switched fields from cholesterol metabolism to molecular neuroscience. This somewhat unusual decision was motivated not only by my personal fascination of the brain, but also by the realization that we did not understand the brain then. As a community, as a scientist, we have no idea how the brain worked, nor do we understand it now, even though much progress has been made, and that we had no approaches to treating diseases to the brain, from autism and schizophrenia to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's diseases. My plan in 1986 was simple. I chose to study synapses because synapses transfer information between neurons and were well characterized functionally. But nothing was known about synapses molecularly, and nobody knew how they actually worked. A whiff of mystery surrounded synapses since they transferred information incredibly quickly, within 1 millisecond or so, by a chemical process that seemed to be impossible. In fact, the eminent John Eccles, another Nobel laureate, long doubted that chemical synaptic transmission was real. The specific question that I asked was how it was possible for a presynaptic terminal to release neurotransmitters by synaptic vesicle exocytosis in response to an action potential in less than a millisecond. A central question that had remained an enigma ever since Bernard Katz with the Spaniard José del Castillo and Fatt and Milindi first demonstrated fast synaptic transmission by vesicle exocytosis. From 1986 to 2011, addressing this question was the central goal of my laboratory. Without going into details, my laboratory discovered the key elements of the machinery that enables the ultra-fast neurotransmitter release process. These elements include the mechanism of membrane fusion mediated by SNEA and SM proteins, a mechanism that was also elucidated by James Rothman, Richard Scheller, Randy Sheckman, and prominently Reinhard Jahn, to the identification of synaptotagments as calcium sensors for fast release, and the description of the active zone scaffold, nucleated by rim proteins that enables the tethering of synaptic vesicles to the release sites, the priming of SNEA complexes for fusion, and the recruitment of calcium channels into close proximity to the tethered vesicles. This is the work that was honored by the Nobel Prize, work that gratifyingly has remained the basis for many continued further studies by labs worldwide, including labs by many of my former lab members. As our work on neurotransmitter release was progressing, I became increasingly interested in a different, distantly related question. How do synapses assemble? How is the specificity of synaptic connections achieved? Work on this question already started in my lab in the 1990s with the discoveries of neurexins and became the main focus of my lab after 2010. As I will describe in the next part of my presentation, this question continues to engage my efforts and is of significant importance for insight into neurodegenerative and neuropsychiatric diseases. I'm now trying in my lab to understand how synapses are built. You have to remember that all chemical synapses operate by the same canonical design. Presynaptic neurotransmitters are stored in synaptic vesicles that undergo exocytosis in response to calcium. This, which in turn is induced by an action potential. This release of neurotransmitters that activates then postsynaptic receptors. The first part of my career was devoted to the understanding of the neurotransmitter release process. In the second part of my career, now ongoing, I'm asking a radically different question: how are synapses formed initially? How are they maintained afterwards? And how are their locations and properties specified? Our working hypothesis is that transsynaptic adhesion molecules acting as signaling devices and not in a mechanical function organize synapses. Accordingly, we have focused on identifying and functionally defining such synaptic adhesion molecules, which we refer to as SAMs, for synaptic adhesion molecules. The results of our present ongoing studies have been both fascinating and humbling. Fascinating because the rich biology has emerged that revealed a high degree of plasticity. Humbling because the identified transsynaptic protein networks turned out to be inordinately complex. For example, neurexins that are presynaptic adhesion molecules we identified in 1992, but only characterized later, are expressed in thousands of splice variants whose generation is highly regulated and bind to more than 30 different postsynaptic ligands, as validated by structural biology. The combinatorial possibilities here are mind-boggling. At this point in my career, I'm not sure we will be able to cleanly dissect the mechanism of transsynaptic signaling by synaptic adhesion molecules, but I'm hopeful that our present work will provide a critical step towards the goal of deconstructing the molecular logic that organizes synapses. This goal is not only important for our understanding of the brain, but also arguably the most important issue in trying to understand many of the brain's diseases. For example, some of the most prominent genes implicated in neuropsychiatric diseases, such as autism and schizophrenia, encode synaptic adhesion molecules. Mutations in neurexin 1, the human neurexin 1 gene, represent the most common single gene mutations in schizophrenia. Moreover, a loss of synapses is likely the first event in neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease that are referred to sometimes as synaptopathies. Given the central importance of understanding how synapses are built, I hope that we will be able to contribute more to solving this central question in modern neuroscience in the years to come, and will also be able to contribute at least a little bit to an understanding of the pervasive diseases of the brain in our aging societies. In the next section of my talk, I would like, if I may, to offer a few suggestions for young scientists. As a Nobel laureate, I'm often asked what advice I could give to young scientists. It's a very flattering question, because after all, what do I know, and am I really qualified to give advice? Does my Nobel Prize entitle me to have better advice than anybody else? Not so sure. But I try, nevertheless, to address this seriously. The standard response of Nobel laureates to this question is to follow your passion, and so on. But I am often a bit suspicious about how genuine such answers are. After all of us rarely have the luxury to follow our passions. Very few times we can actually really do what we would like to do. We generally have to make compromises. As scientists, we always ask ourselves whether what we do is valuable, whether it isn't a waste of resources and time. and whether what we do is actually realistic. This questioning doesn't stop with a Nobel Prize. I'm still asking myself daily the same question. In doing our work, we need to achieve a fine balance between what we feel is important and what we actually are passionate about, and what the society values, what is feasible, what is realistic, and what will have an impact. Importance usually means difficult and risky. Social values usually reflect utility, while feasibility refers to things that we can potentially do with our training and our resources. These considerations apply to all scientists, but young scientists in particular need to actively address these questions in the beginning of their careers. They can't just think about what is the fastest way to a career or what is the biggest passion. Here is my advice for all scientists, but especially for young scientists, advice that reflects what I try to do. I think the input and criticism we get from others, their feedback is the most crucial factor in addressing these questions. But it is important to listen to as many people as possible and then to select the best advice from different people, not just try to accept it all. In my own career, when I started in 1986 to generate a molecular catalog of what is there at a synapse, of how a synaptic vesicle is constituted, composed, many of my peers told me that this project was a descriptive waste of time. I decided to disregard this advice and to persevere, their criticisms notwithstanding. Then later, when we discovered proteins such as synaptotegments and MUNC18, whose properties suggested a key role in synaptic vesicle exocytosis and neurotransmitter release, my peers advised me to move into genetics. This time, I did follow their advice, and it turned out to be the correct thing to do. To achieve the right balance between following prevalent opinions or ignoring them, being rebellious or passionate, is truly the most important challenge of any scientist, not just the young scientist. It is important to avoid misjudging one's expertise and at the same time to avoid being timid and conservative. Just like in the bigger aspects of life, this is one of the biggest challenges we face as humans. How do we judge when we should follow prevalent biases of the time that are often right? And when should we go our own ways and ignore our peers, do things differently, do things that others do not advise us to do? Robert Frost beautifully described this challenge in his famous poem entitled "The Road Not Taken," which ends to say, "Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference." Science and society now is facing arguably its most difficult time in the last 100 years or so. A new difficulty has arisen in science that threatens all of it, not just the progress and future. This is the increasing paradoxical denial of scientific truth. Although all of our lives, from driving a car to being treated by a doctor, are dependent on science, the same science nevertheless is currently imperiled. The attacks on science we now experience, in particular in the United States, are unprecedented in modern history. In Nazi Germany and in the Stalin era of the Soviet Union, certain parts of science were proscribed and suppressed. For example, what the Nazis called Jewish science, which was the best. Or in the Soviet Union, this Lysenko disaster. But science as such in these countries at that time and in itself was actually valued. It is ironic that in our time, science is held in high regards in China, a country that was not originally part of the Western civilization, whereas it is disparaged in much of the Western world. In the US, the current governing elites don't trust scientific results and do everything to abolish scientific inquiries, creating an almost medieval culture. In many countries of Europe, fantasies emerge whereby it is thought that biology can be studied without investigating real animals. Apparently, parties like the German Green Party, a political party, believe that animals are there to be eaten, but not to be researched, that food is more important than knowledge, and that other types of science will magically emerge and solve everything without having to actually study animals, such as artificial intelligence, which is supposed to clear everything, to explain everything. No wonder smart young people in our countries want to have nothing to do with science, and the scientific expertise that is the basis for our civilization is floundering. What to do in this situation with our storied university traditions and our research labs? Besides trying to communicate to the public and to politicians facts that might convince them that science has value, and that, for example, biology without studying real biological organisms is impossible. Is there anything else we can do? Let's face it, our efforts have not been successful up to now. In my view, the biggest problem we face as scientists is the disintegration of the concept of scientific truth, which is not unique to science, but is happening in our entire civilization. In the digital age of the internet, everybody can publicize almost anything at will, claiming that it is correct. We no longer know what is true when we read something. There's a universal loss of truth, and it is difficult for us to figure out facts beyond what we observe with our own eyes. Neither people in general nor the politicians in particular really know anymore what the facts are. Even in science, there are no reliable sources of information. We always have to kind of guess. We all know that in the best journals, Science, Nature, and Cell, a large percentage of papers is likely wrong, hyped at best, simply fantasized at worst. Scores of peer-reviewed journals are published now that likely contain articles which were never critically evaluated. For example, for-profit open access journals advertise their wares by promising conditions that are impossible to fulfill with a real peer review. I receive emails promising a peer-reviewed paper to be accepted within 48 hours. How can this be possible? At this point, anybody can find any result they want in scientific publications to declare it as a published peer-reviewed finding and tout it to the public as a fact. Given the situation, it's not surprising that the public at large distrusts scientists because there's so much reported that is supposed to be peer-reviewed. We need change in this, but I don't have a perfect solution. I'm only raising this question here at this solemn occasion because a Doctor Honoris Causa is the quintessential academic recognition. It is a way to honor scientific truth. I feel challenged because I've personally been battling with this issue, fighting trolls and doubters and defending the purity of my science with little effect. In my view, our most important goal should be to remove science from political discourses and make it neutral and totally independent, isolated from the corruption that governs aspects, at least, of our societies. To achieve this, it is necessary to remove, or at least to regulate, commercial interests in science publishing. Money corrupts. There's too much money in science publishing. Many science journals, especially predatory open access journals, nowadays are paid $5,000 or more simply for sending a submitted paper to a few other scientists who are supposed to evaluate this paper for free and then posting the paper on their website as a published, peer-reviewed fact. Publishing is such a profitable business that, for example, Wiley paid $400 million for acquiring Hindawi, a publisher whose open access journals arguably never had much true scientific impact, although some papers in these journals likely were very useful. This is another reason why I'm deeply grateful for the present honor that represents to me a testimony of incorruptible academic discourse, something we are now sorely missing in the general public domain. Academic public universities have historically always been a bastion of truth, and they are now so again. In closing, I would like to thank you all. I tremendously value the honor that is bestowed on me in this solemn ceremony, not only because it is a wonderful recognition of our work, which, as mentioned above, was largely carried out by the scientists in my laboratory, not by myself. Some of these scientists are present here, chiefly the Spaniards, Professor Rafa Fernandez-Chacon, who I mentioned earlier, and Professor José Rizo, whose outstanding experiments made a major contribution to our understanding of neurotransmitter release. I also value this honor of a doctor honoris causa because it recognizes the entirety of science as a culture. Science is more than a collection of brilliant individuals. Science is more than a collection of facts. Science is a community effort that arises from the communication among many individuals and is distributed among the whole of a people, a nation, and a civilization. Thus, I would like to thank all of you for your support. This honor is truly important to me. Although I have been fortunate to receive several honorary doctorates, this one is special in its meaningfulness, and I have to say also in the beauty and spectacular nature of the ceremony. Andalusia doesn't only have a special place in my heart, it is also a paradigm of Western civilization. Over the centuries, it was at the heart of many cultures that melted into each other, from Romans and Visigoths over the Arabs to the current Catholic institutions. Although many of our contemporaries, including the current ruling elite of the United States, don't want to recognize this, culture emerges from the communication and collaboration of different traditions, of different ways of doing things, of different scientific approaches. No civilization and no people in a nation are ever pure. We are always mixes of ethnicities and traditions. Neither are our ideas and discoveries ever the result of a single development or a single genius, but always arise from the mixing of thoughts and different people's observations. Being awarded the title of Doctor Honoris Causa by the University of Jaén is a special pleasure, as it strengthens my ties with eminent academics, including internationally distinguished colleagues in Spanish biomedicine, who have received the same honor, some of whom are present here with us today, such as Professor José López Arneo and Professor Maria Angela Nieto. There are many people I should thank. I've been one of the luckiest people on earth to gain the support and counsel of so many friends and colleagues, of the people I love. I'm particularly thankful to Professor Rafa Fernandez-Chacon and Angeles Peinado Herreros for bringing me to Andalusia so often. I love Andalusia and its culture. Thus, I would like to conclude by reiterating my gratitude to my colleagues and the faculty of Jaén and to the University Senate for their support. I would also like to express my gratitude to the friends and colleagues who have joined in this solemn academic ceremony, particularly those who are with us today. Many thanks to all.
Acercaos. Dignísimo doctor, os admito e incorporo al claustro de esta Universidad de Jaén con todos los derechos, inmunidades y privilegios inherentes a los demás doctores. En señal de la paz, benevolencia y amistad con que siempre habéis de ejercer vuestro ministerio, recibid ahora, en el nombre de todos los doctores de este claustro aquí presentes, el abrazo de fraternidad de los que se honran y congratulan de ser vuestros hermanos y compañeros. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a pleasure for us. El nuevo doctor ocupe el asiento a él asignado. Rector Juan Gómez, doctor honoris causa por la Universidad de Jaén, Tomás Südhof, vicerrectores y vicerrectoras, secretaria general, gerente y resto de miembros del equipo de gobierno, decanos de facultades y directores de las escuelas politécnicas y de los institutos y centros de investigación, decano de la Facultad de Ciencias Experimentales, director del Departamento de Biología Experimental, doctor honoris causa por la Universidad de Jaén, José López Barneo, doctora por la honoris causa por la Universidad de Jaén, Ángela Nieto, director del Instituto de Biomedicina de Sevilla, Rafael Fernández Chacón, miembros del Consejo Social de la Universidad, presidente de la Diputación de Jaén, delegado de la Junta de Andalucía en Jaén y resto de delegados territoriales, comandante jefe de personal y apoyo de la Comandancia de la Guardia Civil en Jaén, resto de autoridades, representantes de empresas, colegios profesionales, sindicatos, organizaciones no gubernamentales, asociaciones y medios de comunicación, miembros de la comunidad universitaria, señoras y señores, amigos todos. Supone para mí un gran honor y un privilegio dirigirme a todos ustedes en este solemne acto de investidura del doctor Thomas Südhof como doctor honoris causa por la Universidad de Jaén. Nos reunimos en el aula magna para celebrar uno de los actos más solemnes y significativos para nuestra institución universitaria, la investidura de un doctor honoris causa. Estamos en el corazón simbólico de nuestra institución, un lugar donde el conocimiento y la sabiduría se han entrelazado a lo largo de los años y que ha sido testigo de innumerables momentos trascendentales para nuestra comunidad universitaria y para la sociedad jienense en su conjunto. Hoy tenemos la suerte de vivir uno de esos días que formarán parte de nuestra historia. Acogemos en nuestro claustro de doctores a un científico excepcional, un referente mundial en el campo de la medicina y la neurociencia, cuya trayectoria ejemplar y contribuciones al avance del conocimiento merecen nuestra más profunda admiración. Rendimos homenaje y reconocemos los méritos del doctor Thomas Südhof, una persona que ha dedicado su vida a cultivar el conocimiento, a compartirlo y a transmitirlo a la sociedad. Un científico genuino, un ejemplo que debe inspirar a cualquier sociedad, pues encarna todo aquello que hace único a los seres humanos. Como todos sabemos, la universidad es una institución que guarda tradiciones de largo recorrido. Hoy celebramos una ceremonia llena de significados, siguiendo una liturgia académica que nos recuerda que somos una universidad pública ya consolidada y con un acreditado prestigio internacional y que queremos ser una universidad aún más abierta, con mayor proyección internacional y que trabaja por el bienestar de nuestra provincia. El doctorado honoris causa es una distinción honorífica otorgada a personas eminentes que han realizado contribuciones significativas en diversos campos del conocimiento. Es un acto de justicia, un reconocimiento a la excelencia y al compromiso con el saber. Es un tributo a aquellas personas que con su trabajo y ejemplo inspiran a generaciones futuras, como las que tenemos aquí, y nos recuerdan la importancia del conocimiento como motor de progreso y transformación social. Por ello, estimado profesor Südhof, representa para mí, como rector de la Universidad de Jaén, un enorme privilegio darle la más cordial bienvenida a nuestro claustro de doctores, una muestra del aplauso de nuestra comunidad universitaria a sus extraordinarios méritos como científico y a la defensa de los principios y valores universitarios. Al aceptar esta distinción, pasa a formar parte de la orla de personalidades que honran a nuestra institución académica. Hoy queremos distinguir una trayectoria profesional y científica ejemplar, culminada en 2013 con el Premio Nobel de Medicina. Hoy la Universidad de Jaén se ve fortalecida por su prestigio, por el prestigio del doctor Südhof, y se enriquece con su conocimiento y experiencia. Nos complace de forma extraordinaria que sea usted la primera persona de nuestro claustro de doctores con tal altísima distinción. Profesor Südhof, le agradecemos sinceramente su disposición para formar parte de nuestra historia. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Permítame expresar también nuestro agradecimiento al Departamento de Biología Experimental por su acertada propuesta de nombrar al profesor Südhof como doctor honoris causa. Su iniciativa ha permitido a nuestra universidad reconocer la valía de un científico excepcional, un verdadero faro que ilumina el camino de la investigación en el campo de la neurología. Asimismo, quiero felicitar al catedrático Diego Franco, gracias Diego, por su magistral laudatio, un discurso que ha sabido plasmar el brillante currículum del doctor Südhof, así como los rasgos que mejor definen su extensa trayectoria académica, científica y profesional. La inquietud por explorar nuevos caminos de la ciencia, la perseverancia en la búsqueda de la excelencia y el espíritu innovador. Todavía en el capítulo de agradecimientos quiero detenerme en la figura de José López Barneo, catedrático emérito de Fisiología de la Universidad de Sevilla, tosiriano ilustre y también doctor honoris causa por nuestra universidad desde el año 2018, porque su contribución para que estemos aquí ha sido determinante. Y lo mismo puedo decir de nuestra catedrática emérita de Biología Celular, María Ángeles Peinado, que por desgracia hoy no ha podido acompañarnos, una de las primeras personas que empezó a dar forma a una propuesta que el claustro de la Universidad de Jaén acogió con entusiasmo y sin titubeos. Una iniciativa en la que también ha sido pieza clave Rafael Fernández Chacón, catedrático de Fisiología y Neurobiología en la Universidad de Sevilla, actual director del Instituto de Biomedicina de Sevilla, el IBIS, y uno de los discípulos españoles más cercanos a Thomas Südhof. Gracias de corazón a Pepe, a Ángeles y a Rafael. En una época en la que con frecuencia se exigen resultados inmediatos, la trayectoria de nuestro nuevo doctor honoris causa se configura como una guía que nos recuerda el error de buscar una aplicación inmediata del conocimiento, recordándonos que ese enfoque nunca ha sido verdaderamente productivo para la ciencia. Su figura es fascinante y encarna la pasión por el conocimiento. Resulta revelador revisar una especie de autobiografía que él mismo redactó con motivo de la concesión del Premio Nobel y cuya lectura recomiendo para poder entender la valía personal y profesional del profesor Südhof. Nos cuenta que de niño aprendió a tocar el fagot, motivado por un maravilloso profesor, Herbert Taucher, que era el fagotista solista de la ópera local y que, según cuenta, le enseñó más sobre la vida que la mayoría de los otros profesores. En los primeros años sintió una mayor inclinación por la música, la filosofía o la historia, pero al final se decidió por la medicina, prácticamente por descarte, no tanto por vocación, al considerar esta disciplina la vía más práctica y segura para su carrera profesional / laboral, ¿no? Afortunadamente, su talento y curiosidad lo llevaron a ser mucho más que un buen médico. Lo convirtieron en uno de los líderes mundiales de la neurociencia. Como ya se ha dicho, se ha centrado durante más de 4 décadas en entender la transmisión sináptica, esto es, cómo se comunican las neuronas. Su investigación ha proporcionado información clave, determinante, sobre ese todavía desconocido proceso que puede degenerar en trastornos neurológicos y psiquiátricos. En otras palabras, lo que motiva su investigación es comprender el cerebro humano para así desentrañar el comportamiento que nos define. Casi nada, casi nada. Es decir, sus inéditos hallazgos no surgieron de la búsqueda de una cura específica, sino de una interrogante fundamental. ¿Cómo opera el cerebro? ¿Cómo opera el cerebro? Dar respuesta a esa fundamental, trascendental y atávica pregunta es la principal razón que ha guiado a Thomas Südhof en su ya dilatada trayectoria investigadora y científica. Traigo aquí una reflexión de Marie Curie. Nada en la vida debe ser temido, solo debe entenderse. Ahora es el momento de entender más para que podamos temer menos. Pues fue precisamente esa valentía intelectual de Thomas Südhof la de atreverse a entender antes que a refugiarse en aplicar lo que abrió, sin preverlo, nuevas y asombrosas fronteras para la humanidad. Nuestro nuevo doctor honoris causa siempre ha visto la ciencia como algo práctico y emocionante. Su deseo siempre ha sido que su trabajo fuera útil y que tuviera un impacto beneficioso para las personas. Gracias a su investigación básica fundamental, siempre en la frontera del conocimiento, hoy podemos comprender mejor devastadoras patologías como el Alzheimer, Parkinson, la epilepsia y otras relacionadas. Cuando en alguna ocasión le han preguntado al doctor Südhof por qué ha dedicado tantos años a comprender cómo funciona el cerebro, su respuesta siempre ha sido clara y elocuente, porque las enfermedades mentales son tan malas o peores que el cáncer, pero mucho más frecuentes, y es una realidad. Es inspirador conocer su convicción sobre la necesidad de ayudar a los pacientes con estas patologías, que pierden la individualidad por completo, porque olvidan los recuerdos, olvidan su experiencia de vida y ello supone la pérdida de identidad, algo muy duro, muy duro. Por eso la ciencia básica es tan esencial y por eso los poderes públicos deben apoyarla sin vacilación, sin ningún tipo de duda, sin ningún tipo de huidas hacia adelante y sin ningún tipo de ambajes. Recuerdo aquí las palabras de Severo Ochoa, fallecido en 1993, el mismo año en el que se creó nuestra querida universidad, la UJA. Y esas palabras dicen lo siguiente: la ciencia siempre vale la pena, porque sus descubrimientos, tarde o temprano, antes o después, siempre se aplican. Y hoy día el profesor Südhof sigue activo, quizás más que nunca, probablemente más que nunca. Fiel, como suelo decir, o decía un rector nuestro, Manuel Parra, ahora está ocupado, pero no preocupado. Fiel a su filosofía de vida, sigue trabajando en su laboratorio de la Universidad de Stanford, en California, impulsado por una insaciable curiosidad, la que él mismo describe como la única razón para seguir una carrera científica. Nuestro propósito como universidad pública es contribuir al progreso social, despertar y desarrollar el talento y fomentar la inquietud intelectual. Al tributarle este reconocimiento, rendimos homenaje a la esencia de cualquier universidad pública: la generación, transmisión y transferencia del conocimiento. Profesor Südhof, la Universidad de Jaén, desde ya su universidad, nuestra universidad, quiere verse reflejada en su figura. Representa lo que queremos ser. Su ejemplo nos motiva a sentir en grande, para pensar en grande, y nos contagia la ambición y el coraje necesarios para afrontar los desafíos que nos aguardan como sociedad. Como acaba de señalar el doctor Südhof en su discurso de aceptación, la carrera científica es en realidad un equilibrio delicado, ¿sí?, entre lo que interesa al investigador o a la investigadora y lo que la sociedad nos demanda. La investigación encarna esa vocación de servicio público. No se trata de acumular saber, sino de responder a la necesidad social. El trabajo de Thomas Südhof va mucho más allá de artículos y libros científicos en revistas y editoriales de prestigio, mucho más allá. Lo realmente trascendente de su dilatada trayectoria investigadora es que el conocimiento generado constituye un cimiento sólido, pero no inmutable, gracias al cual médicos y científicos pueden determinar cada vez con mayor precisión qué pieza está rota en las patologías del cerebro y, con suerte, poder repararla. No es una cuestión menor, no es una cuestión baladí, para nada. Como decía Carl Sagan, famoso astrónomo y científico, la fortaleza de la ciencia moderna radica en su disposición a corregir los hallazgos del ayer a la luz de las evidencias de hoy, garantizando así que nuestro conocimiento sea una herramienta cada vez más precisa para mejorar la vida humana y el futuro de la sociedad. Atravesamos una época compleja, cierto. La sociedad se enfrenta, en palabras del propio Südhof, a una creciente y paradójica negación de la verdad científica. Y es así. Y eso es preocupante. Además, la ciencia sufre presiones internas derivadas de intereses comerciales, económicos, que la erosionan también. Gracias, querido Tomás, por decirlo tan claramente. El dinero corrompe, y es una realidad. Y hay que decirlo alto y claro. También es cierto que luego hay que actuar, hay que adoptar acciones. que corrijan esas, digamos, deficiencias que todos y todas pues, probablemente conozcamos. Vivimos tiempos dominados por una economía a veces deshumanizadora, con una estrategia de resultados cortoplacistas. Esa dinámica choca de lleno con la investigación y la educación, que son caminos largos que exigen esfuerzo y recursos sostenidos en el tiempo. Por eso, hoy más que hoy, debemos recordar que nuestro verdadero propósito trasciende la formación de buenos profesionales. Debemos formar seres humanos íntegros, con conciencia crítica y responsabilidad social. En esta era de incertidumbre es más necesario que nunca defender la universidad pública, que debe seguir actuando como bastión del saber y de la igualdad de oportunidades, y ser, como acaba de definir a nuestro nuevo doctor Honoris Causa, un testimonio del discurso académico incorruptible. No me cansaré de repetir que la inversión en conocimiento es la más rentable para un país. La palabra clave es invertir. Invertir en ciencia, invertir en investigación, en innovación, en cultura. Por eso vuelvo a reivindicar aquí que nuestras autoridades estatales y autonómicas deben asegurar una financiación suficiente para que podamos cumplir las misiones universitarias. Necesitamos savia nueva, jóvenes con inquietud y talento, que los tenemos y muchos. Y para ello necesitamos los recursos necesarios que nos permitan abordar con garantías el relevo generacional de nuestras plantillas y seguir propiciando la transformación que precisa la sociedad jienense. Sabemos, profesor Südhof, que ha recibido innumerables honores de las más prestigiosas instituciones del mundo. Así es. El reconocimiento que hoy le confiere la Universidad de Jaén es distinto. Es el honor de una universidad joven, vibrante y comprometida con la transformación de su entorno. Es el homenaje de la tierra, que en un día de otoño de 2013 fue testigo de su consagración mundial, como ha recogido su padrino en su magnífica Laudatio. Es el abrazo de una comunidad que ve en su persona y en su trayectoria académica y científica la confirmación de su propia apuesta como motor de futuro. En la Universidad de Jaén tenemos la responsabilidad de formar excelentes profesionales, capaces de afrontar los nuevos retos de una sociedad globalizada, cada vez más dominada por la tecnología y marcada por las desigualdades sociales. Y a su vez tenemos la responsabilidad de que esos profesionales sean ciudadanos libres, creativos y tolerantes. Pero nuestra universidad tiene también que ser una herramienta útil para provocar la necesaria transformación de la sociedad jienense, para encontrar soluciones a los problemas de nuestra comunidad y, por supuesto, para generar, transmitir y transferir conocimiento. En poco más de 3 décadas, la Universidad de Jaén, la UJA, nuestra UJA, ha protagonizado una formidable e impresionante evolución, consolidando una posición de prestigio en el ámbito nacional e internacional. No en vano ocupamos una destacada posición en el prestigioso ranking de Shanghái, que nos sitúa en la franja de las 800 a 900 mejores universidades de todo el mundo. También es importante destacar la excelente posición en el Young University Ranking, como la mejor universidad joven de Andalucía, la número 8 de España, y una universidad top mundial, dentro de las 250 mejores del mundo. No obstante, y dicho todo esto, nuestro principal aval son las más de 70.000 personas formadas en nuestras aulas, muchas de las cuales ocupan hoy puestos relevantes, puestos de alta responsabilidad en todo el mundo. El crecimiento de la Universidad de Jaén se debe en gran parte a un profundo arraigo con la sociedad jienense, que ha hecho suya la institución. Hemos construido juntos, comunidad universitaria y sociedad civil jienense, un fuerte sentimiento de orgullo y pertenencia. Y tenemos la convicción de que el futuro de Jaén se escribe en gran medida desde la Universidad de Jaén. Nuestra institución, siempre con su rector a la cabeza, seguirá ejerciendo el liderazgo social que le corresponde, desde el conocimiento y la autonomía. Un liderazgo para impulsar el cambio de mentalidad que tanto necesita Jaén, dejando de un lado el conformismo y la resignación y adoptando siempre una actitud proactiva y sin complejos de ningún tipo. Vivimos una época en que las exigencias son cada vez mayores. Corresponde, por tanto, seguir buscando esa mejora diaria, porque nos hemos propuesto llegar siempre más allá y no conformarnos. Por eso necesitamos a los mejores y en ese contexto la incorporación del doctor Südhof a nuestro claustro de doctores es un motivo de alegría y de satisfacción para todos los que estamos aquí presentes, para toda la comunidad universitaria de la Universidad de Jaén y también, por supuesto, para nuestra tierra, para Jaén. ¿Y por qué? Porque marca un hito, como decía anteriormente. La presencia de un laureado con el Nobel enriquece nuestro cuerpo doctoral, catapulta la proyección internacional de la universidad y reafirma nuestro compromiso inquebrantable con la investigación de vanguardia. Con la concesión del Honoris Causa, nuestra más alta distinción, no solo reconocemos la extraordinaria trayectoria y las valiosísimas contribuciones a la ciencia del doctor Südhof, sino que también le encomendamos una importante misión: ser embajador de la Universidad de Jaén en todo el mundo, allí donde vaya, allí donde esté. Querido Tomás, querido Tom, como doctor honoris causa te conviertes en un referente para nuestra comunidad universitaria. Desde hoy pasa a formar parte indeleble de nuestra comunidad intelectual y ética. Tu nombre se escribe desde ahora en la historia de nuestra institución. Que tu sabiduría y visión sea un modelo para nuestro estudiantado y también para nuestro personal docente e investigador. Que tu voz contribuya a difundir los principios universitarios que defendemos y que tu ejemplo nos ilumine durante muchos, muchos años. Parafraseando a tu admirado poeta Robert Frost, el camino menos transitado nos espera para marcar la diferencia. En nombre de nuestra querida comunidad universitaria, bienvenido al claustro de doctores de la Universidad de Jaén, bienvenido a tu universidad. Muchas gracias, he dicho. Gracias. Doctores, levantaos y cubríos. Se levanta la sesión. Iremos ahora a tomar unas fotos y después, quien quiera, una cervecita en el comedor del C4. Gracias.